Hello, hello, hello. This is John, the Gringo CTO. So, those who don't know, I am living in Mexico City and I have for some years now. And I work actually in the software industry. I speak what I think is pretty good Spanish. At least I'm able to work in it successfully, if not a majority of the time, probably about half. And today I happen to be on location, let's say in Polanco, helping a client, and it inspired me to make a video about just some patterns that I see about how Spanish is used in software engineering, how it relates to English, my native language, etc. And I think this channel is going to be partly about just being a software engineer in Mexico, and also just talking about what that process looks like and everything. So this is sort of a toe in the water on that, let's say. Before I get into it, I think I am probably the only non-ethically compromised YouTuber in the sense I'm not trying to sell you anything. I do this just for fun. And the truth is, it's a lot more fun if you guys are interacting with me in the comments and supporting the channel and all that. So if you would, please leave a like, a subscribe, argue with me, leave a comment, what have you. All of it's helpful and welcome. So uh, without further ado, I think that vocabulary in Spanish, as it relates to programming, kind of falls in one of three buckets. The first is just straight up words from Spanish that are repurposed for use in this particular category. So, good example of that would be empujar. Like you'll see that on doors to push them in. It is also used very commonly to talk about pushing code. Um, or something like that. I mean, normally you'd say more like lanzar if you're talking about a product to like launch something or deploy it, as opposed to push, but I suppose you could use that as well and be understood. So that's one broad category. It's just like in English, you start with a regular word and you apply it to your industry. Uh, Another category is stuff where, the truth is, software engineering as we know it pretty much emerged in the English speaking world. And so a lot of the vocabulary just started there. I mean, you see it in the source code itself, right? And for that reason, actually, most people do speak at least a little bit of English or understand it if they write code. But um, it doesn't stop there, I guess is my point. So there are certain English words that have become so ubiquitous that they've just been adopted into the language. Dashboard is a good example of that. Like you might be able to do a more literal translation somehow. I'm not sure, but bottom line, everybody just says dashboard, and that's the word. Now, I increasingly find myself in that situation where I can't think of a good word in Spanish to describe what I'm talking about, and como se dice dashboard, and the answer ends up just being dashboard more often than not. So that's kind of interesting. But I think the last category is actually the most interesting, which is where you start with a word like dashboard, like something that was very English in origin, and it gets tweaked in just such a way that it sounds more like a Spanish word. And so, a funny example of that, and I don't think this is formal at all, but it is something I hear a lot. In English, people will talk about branching something or to branch as a verb in the context of get. And there's probably a more correct way to say it in Spanish, like crear una rama or something like that. But the truth is, among engineers, it's just very common to say something like branchear. So they start with an English word, branch, which is not native to Spanish, obviously, and it just becomes a verb like that. And that's also pretty common. The challenging part is just understanding if you want to say something like which category is it going to fall into. But the good news is a lot of times you can just use an English word and like it'll be understood. So that's the good part. And I guess like there's kind of a quasi fourth category here where it's kind of a thing that can fall in one of more than one category. So that would be something like a select box. There is a Spanish word for that. It's desplegable. But very commonly, you'll also just hear people use the word un select or something like that, and it'll be understood as well, even among themselves, not just because they're interacting with an English speaker. So just be aware that like there's really not a consistent standard yet. It's one of those things where I think it'll probably take maybe another century to sort itself out. We'll all be able to, but by then we'll have moved on to other stuff, and it'll probably be another issue that's similar. But anyway, just wanted to highlight a few of my favorites that I've encountered. We talked about dashboard. Motor is like engine. So if you wanted to talk about like a pluggable storage engine in MySQL or something, like motor would probably be the idiomatic way to say that. Pestaña actually means eyelash in Spanish, but they use that for tab in the context of a browser. If you want to talk about a render, like a render cycle on the page, pintar, which means to paint, literally. Performance, I don't know if this one's just funny or whatever, but it's rendimiento. So it's just a useful word, and it comes up a lot. Um, so Yeah, you could think of that as ironically. I think I kind of included this originally because it's in contrast to the word render here. You might think that rendir is has something to do with it, but it doesn't. Um, so yeah, just something to be aware of there. Form fields, campos. This is a case where campo is like a field that a farmer would work also. So it's kind of interesting that it got translated the same way in Spanish, but they do use the the Spanish word for that. They don't use like field from English or something. And then you have some other ones that are just kind of funny, like mergear, which you would think it's pronounced mergear, just given the normal pronunciation rules, but it's mergear from what I hear. Branchear is another one. Checkout is another one. It seems like for whatever reason, a lot of the verbs from Git have been adopted straight from English. So anyway, one thing that I was motivated by is the fact that none of this seems to be written down anywhere. And so what I'm kind of thinking is I might just start documenting all of this in a public GitHub repo that myself and other people who interact with Spanish speakers can start contributing to, or Spanish speakers themselves, if they're just like, well, this is the stuff that we wish gringos knew when they decided to start working with us. So yeah, I guess that's it. If you have any thoughts, comments, or especially corrections, because I am still a learner, I will always be learning, right? So if you're a native Spanish speaker and have something to correct me on, that's more than welcome. But apart from that, I will see you guys next time.